We're on chapter 8. So 101 says, such things as a continuum and an aggregation are false in the same way as a rosary and an army. Remember we talked about that? There is no real owner of suffering because there is no inherently existent person there. Therefore, who has control over it? Or whose suffering is it? You know? So then 102 goes on, there being no inherent owner of suffering, so there's no inherently existent person who can say this is my suffering. Yeah, because there's no person in the aggregates to start with, there's no person in the continuum to start with, so there's no inherently existent owner of the suffering. There can be no distinction at all between that of myself and others. Okay, if there's no owner of the suffering, then what's the difference between my suffering and your suffering? If there's a car that nobody owns, what's the difference between it being my car and it being your car? Are you getting what I mean? No. Okay. There's suffering. There's no inherently existent person who owns the suffering. It's not my suffering, and it's not your suffering, because there's no inherently existent me and no inherently existent you, because when we look in the body and mind, there's no inherently existent person that can be found there. When we look in the mental continuum, which we often think of as the person, there's no inherently existent independent person in that continuum. Okay, so it's similar. If there's a car, yeah, doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to you. Okay, so it's kind of equal in that respect. There's nobody there who possesses it, but it's a car. So there's nobody that possesses the suffering. It's suffering. Yeah. So the point is, if it's not my suffering and it's not your suffering, why do I ignore it? You know? Or if you make it, maybe it makes more sense to say, if it's not my personal suffering, it's just suffering in general. Yeah. Does suffering in general, should it exist? Just because it's suffering in general? Does that, you're all looking at me stupefied. Yeah, something, we're not communicating here. Okay? Okay, so do you get it? There's no inherently existent owner of suffering. Are you okay with that? Okay. So then, there's no distinction at all between my suffering and your suffering. Do you get that? Okay. Yeah. So, thus, I shall dispel it because it hurts. Yeah, it doesn't have to be my suffering. It doesn't have to be your suffering. It hurts. It doesn't matter who it hurts. It hurts. Okay? There's a fire burning around here. Does it matter whether it's on our land or our neighbor's land? No. It's got to be put out because it's dangerous for all of us. Okay? So why am I so certain that I shouldn't eliminate the suffering of others? Okay, so the mind that says, well, it's not my suffering, why should I get involved? You know, these Syrians over there, it's their suffering. They're halfway around the world. I don't know them. It's caused by their own crazy government, as if our government had nothing to do with it. It's caused by their crazy government, you know, so why should I get involved? Why should I care? I have enough problems of my own. Okay? If we don't care about other people's suffering, what happens? Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like the terrible situation after Russia was in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And there was such suffering among the people in Afghanistan. They all had PTSD, or they were all very deeply traumatized. Out of that was a fertile ground for Wahhabism and radicalism, and it was an unhealthy brew that has affected the whole world.
Right. Yeah. That kind of thing. Or what I was saying yesterday about, you know, well, it's not my kids. Why should I pay more property tax for them to go to school? Yeah, the same thing. You know, you don't care about other people's suffering. You don't care about, you know, what happened in Afghanistan. And as a result, you know, we wind up suffering more. Okay. But even without that, there's no inherently existent person that the suffering belongs to. You know, this is something we talked about it yesterday. You know, we say my suffering, and our suffering becomes so intense due to the concept of I and due to the concept of mine that we're so, you know, we so totally misapprehend who we are and how we exist, that this misapprehension blows up the severity of the suffering. Okay, are you getting that? Yeah? So we're not saying there's no me and there's no you, but when we're suffering and we go, my suffering, it's unbearable. Whose suffering is that? Who is the I that is the owner of that suffering? Can you find that I that owns that suffering? Is it in your body and mind? Is it separate from your body and mind? You know, it feels like there's some independent entity that is really and truly me, the essence of me-ness that is here simply because I exist, independent of causes and conditions, independent of everything. I'm here. And I own that suffering. Therefore, when I'm suffering, it's a national catastrophe. And Shantideva's turning around saying, who owns that suffering? Who are you going to point to that owns that suffering? When you say, my suffering, who's that owner? Is it your body? Is it your mind? Is it something separate from your body and mind? Yeah. In other words, we feel like there's a real person in there that owns the suffering. But just because we feel something doesn't mean it exists. Whoa, what are you talking about? If I feel it, it exists. If I think it, it exists. Don't be so sure. George Bush thought there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Just because he thought it, did they exist? Okay, so just because we feel something, just because we think something, doesn't mean it exists. So we're questioning something very deep inside that we've never questioned before. Yeah? So we can't really find an inherent owner of the suffering, either what we call my suffering or your suffering. Yeah. So why shouldn't we eliminate the suffering of others simply because it hurts? Yeah. Or even take the others out of that. Why shouldn't we eliminate suffering simply because it hurts someone? It doesn't matter who. Okay? Yeah, because our excuse is, well, I don't feel it, so why should I get involved? Why should I eliminate it? You know? I have enough problems already. Give me a break. Okay, then 103. Okay, here's our self-centered thought. It comes back, and it says, but since neither the suffering nor the sufferer truly exists, why should I turn away the misery of all? Okay, so self-centered says, oh, well, you just said there's no owner of the suffering, and there's no truly existent owner of the suffering. There's no truly existent suffering. So, you see, why should I get involved with everybody's suffering? Because there's no person who owns it, and there's no real suffering anyway. So I want to go watch TV. Leave me alone. Okay? Our self-centered thought comes back. What's the problem with what our self-centered thought's thinking?
Because there is conventional suffering.
Exactly. It's going to the extreme of nihilism and saying, oh, no inherently existent suffering, then there's no suffering at all, not even conventional suffering. But there is conventional suffering. Okay. And this is part of the challenge, is realizing the difference between ultimately existing suffering, which does not exist, and conventionally existent suffering that does exist. And we can't tell the difference between them. In our mind, they're completely mixed up. Because we can't differentiate what the object of negation is. Yeah. And we think, oh, object of negation means, I feel I exist. So if I negate this big I that I feel exists, then there's absolutely nothing there. So the person's totally vanished. So there's nobody suffering to eliminate whatsoever. Yeah, that's nihilistic. Yeah, there's no ultimately existent person whose suffering there is to eliminate. But there is a conventional person. And there's a conventional me, and there's a conventional you. But that doesn't mean that my suffering is more important than yours. Okay. So Shantideva's retort is, this is no ground for argument, for if I prevent my own sufferings, surely I should prevent the sufferings of all. Yeah, suffering has no ownership. If I prevent my own, I should prevent everybody's. If this wildfire is just burning, and we don't know whether it's on my property or your property, do we just let it burn? No. If I put out the fire on my property, surely I should help put out the fire on your property too. Because it doesn't matter whose property it is, a wildfire is dangerous. Communicating somehow? Yeah? Yeah, do we just say because Ebola didn't come to our country, therefore we shouldn't get involved in it? Or the new Zika virus? Oh, it's not here, so I won't get involved. I mean, it is here, but we pretend it is. Therefore I won't get involved. It doesn't matter. That's Brazil's problem. Yeah? Is that the way we should think? That doesn't make much sense. I mean, what kind of human being are we that we just care about it if it affects us and stick our head in the ground like an ostrich if it doesn't affect us at this particular moment. Okay? So if I prevent my own suffering, surely I should prevent the sufferings of all. If not, since I am just like other sentient beings, I should not prevent my own suffering either. So if I shouldn't put out the wildfire on your property, then I shouldn't put it out on my property either. Because it doesn't matter, we'll just let it burn. Stupid. Okay, at 104, then self-centeredness comes back again. And it says, but, since, you're telling me to be compassionate, but since this compassion will bring me much misery, why should I exert myself to develop it? In other words, compassion makes me miserable. Yeah? I mean, you hear of all these people suffering from compassion overwhelm or compassion burnout or whatever they call it. Actually, that if you suffer from burnout or compassion fatigue, your compassion still needs to be refined to be true compassion. Yeah. And it's difficult to have really true compassion. Yeah. Okay. So self-centered is saying, compassion just brings me so much misery. So why should I develop it? Yeah. Better, I just live my own simple life. Mind my own business. My rice bowl is full. Yeah. PAP rules the country. The Singaporeans are getting this. PAP rules the country. It's not on our island. Why should I get involved? Okay. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is, we're the superpower of the world. We're going to get involved. Whether you want it or not, we're going to get involved. So you see there's a little bit of extremism here. Okay. Okay, so Shantideva replies to this. This person saying, this compassion will bring me much misery. Why should I exert myself to develop it? Shantideva says, should I contemplate the suffering of living creatures, how could the misery of compassion be more? In other words, if you think compassion is going to bring you so much misery, try contemplating the suffering of living beings. And which is greater, the pain from contemplating the suffering of living beings or the pain that you derive from your compassion? Yeah? Because the pain we derive from our compassion actually is personal distress. It's not pain derived from compassion. It's because we feel uncomfortable with it. But if we really consider, the suffering of the other person, certainly the discomfort we feel developing compassion is nothing considering the suffering of the other person or the other people. So 105, if by one person's suffering, the suffering of many would be destroyed, surely kind-hearted people would accept it for the sake of themselves and others. Okay? So, if by one person's suffering, the suffering of many other people could be destroyed or prevented, what makes more sense if we're that one person? Yeah? To assume the suffering ourselves for the benefit of others. Yeah? So surely kind-hearted people would accept it, that suffering, for the sake of themselves and others. Now, for the sake of others, yeah, we can understand that, because many other people will survive. Why would you take on that suffering yourself, even for the sake of yourself? Why would you do that?
Because it's unbearable not to do so.
Yeah, because it's totally unbearable not to do it. And you'd have a hard time really living at peace with yourself if you didn't do it. I was thinking about this actually because Elie Wiesel, who died a couple of days ago, he was 15, I think, when he went to Auschwitz, and his father was beaten to death not far from where he was, and he could hear the beating of his father being beaten to death. And he felt horribly guilty for that, for not intervening, And I really thought about that a lot, What do you do in that kind of situation when you know that if you intervene, they're going to kill both of you? But if you don't intervene and you live and the other person dies, can you really live with yourself? And I think the way he handled it at first, he realized he couldn't intervene because he would get killed too. But then he transformed his guild to become a spokesperson for all those people who were killed in the Holocaust. Yeah. So instead of feeling guilty his whole life, he did something useful. So I think that was a wise decision on his part, although it must have been excruciating to make. Totally excruciating. I was thinking about that because one of the men that I worked with, inmates in Oklahoma, the glorious state of Oklahoma. We have some Oklahomans in the office, in the audience, with the dear Governor Mario Fallon, who might be the next vice presidential candidate. Unless the glorious Honorable Chris Christie or the beautiful, gorgeous Sarah Palin is chosen instead. Anyway.
This is Eastern Washington.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we don't have any good candidate here for vice president. So he was in Oklahoma, and they were going to execute him. There was a lot of doubt about whether he was guilty, but the state said he was, and they were going to execute him. And I had already planned the trip. I was already out of the country. I think I was in Singapore or India when he was executed. But one of the people from the Abbey went, and a Geshe who lived in Arkansas went. And I was thinking, if I had been here, would I have gone? And of course I would have wanted to be there to support him. But if I were really honest, I could not sit there and let them execute a human being and just sit there. Impossible for me. I could not do it. And I would create a scene, and I would yell and scream, and they'd drag me out of the room, and it wouldn't do any good. So it was probably good that I didn't go, and I said goodbye to him before. But I, in a way, admire the people who could go and offer him support. The Geshe was saying O Mani Padme Hum in a very, very loud voice throughout the whole thing. All the other reporters and people in the witness room were looking at him. Okay. But, yeah. Okay, so here, surely kind-hearted people would accept it for the sake of themselves and others. Huh? But then often, I don't know about you, but I'm presented with a situation in which I could intervene, and I don't. Yeah? This situation of, we were talking about it in the BBC's last week. If you're a bystander and there's lots of other people around, then nobody else is intervening. Why should I? Yeah? Nobody else thinks this is important. Why should I? Yeah? So that comes, and then of course we justify the situation as well. So it's difficult. It's hard. Yeah. Although one time I look back on this situation now, and I can't believe this, but this was during the time when my parents weren't speaking to me because I was ordained, and they had come to, they were coming to Hong Kong where I lived, so they spoke to me for that time, but not before or after. And we were at, what do you do in Hong Kong? You go to a shopping mall. That's what everybody goes to Hong Kong for. So, if I wanted to see my parents, I had to go where they were going. So we were in this shopping mall, and one woman just had a seizure, right there in the middle of the shopping mall, and she was on the ground and rolling around. And I just automatically went to her, and somebody else called Hong Kong's version of 911, and then, the ambulance came, they picked her up, I went with, I said to Mom and Dad, I'll see you later, I'll be back, and I went, and that was it. And thinking about it, with the kind of relationship I have with my parents, and my parents would probably not get involved in that kind of thing, but somehow, I just automatically did it. So, anyway, yeah, so sometimes. But when I think of, these people who fall off the platform, the subway in New York, and it happened a couple of weeks ago, and these people jump on the tracks even though there's a train that's 2 stations away to pull him out. And I asked myself, would I do that? Or am I just too afraid and too self-centered? Of course, these are extreme situations. Our mind always thinks about extreme situations. So maybe it's better not to think about extremes, but to think about they need another person doing the lunch dishes. Something that's not so extreme, where I'm not risking my life. Yeah, would I volunteer to, help with the lunch dishes if I didn't have to? Yeah, or somebody else is needed to help stack the wood. Would I volunteer to go and help stack the wood? Or would I find something else that's more comfortable for me to do? Yeah. So, maybe let's not go to the extreme situations because they don't really happen that often. But let's start with the easy situations. Would we get involved? And I remember one time I was staying at Deer Park in the nun's house that was down the hill, and one of the monks was wheeling the garbage cans up to the monastery part, not towards the house where I was living, but I was there on the road. And it was one monk that we had some kind of history. He's the monk from my story about the horse that got stuck in the middle of the river. You remember that one? Yeah, so that monk. So, not Sam, but, yeah. And so he was there, down there, and he was going to wheel the garbage cans up. And my first thought was, oh, I'll help. I'll help wheel the garbage cans up. And my second thought was, I don't know. Because, I remember when he, scolded me when I tried to help one time before. Maybe I better protect myself and not get involved this time. So I didn't say anything except hi, and I let him carry. And then I thought, but my first thought was to help. Yeah, why didn't I help? Or at least volunteer? Because this thing of, well, because he may yell at me again. I don't like being yelled at. Okay? So to look in those simpler situations and see, what's the reticence that we have to get involved in things. Mm-hmm. Or even, a friend asks us, a friend says, I'm moving, can you come over and help me Saturday morning? And Saturday morning is the time when you like to sleep late. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, I have an appointment Saturday morning, I can't help you. Our appointment is with our bed. Yeah? Okay, so it's interesting. Start with the small things and see where the hesitancy is. Again, we shouldn't go to the extreme. We are very much extremists and say, oh, now every time anybody needs anything, I've got to volunteer and I'm going to be so exhausted. Don't go to that extreme. Yeah. That's an extreme thought. I don't think that that's going to really happen, that you're going to, every free moment be asked to help with something. Yeah. So don't think, oh yeah, every moment I'm awake, I'm going to be running around helping with this and that. They're going to ask me to do all sorts of things, and I'm going to hurt, and I'm going to be exhausted, and then they're not going to be satisfied with what I do anyway. Why don't they just leave me alone? We go to that kind of extreme. Just, stop the drama. Yeah, okay, somebody asked me this one time, can I do it? Can I not do it? Well, I have time. Doesn't take that much time. I can do it. Do it. Finished. End of story. Have some cup of tea and go on with your life. Yeah? Do you see how our self-centered thought builds drama around the smallest thing? The tiniest thing, we make drama. Yeah. Can you think of some stories in your life? Who, me? No. Oh, maybe one of you have a story? Me? Okay. Anybody have a story? Okay, Joe? Go.
Are you wanting a story of creating drama, or are you wanting just a story about opportunities?
Either one. Either one. If you could tell one of both.
Oh, right.
And then explore what the difference is between them.
I'm not sure I signed up for all that, but you asked for help, I considered it, and I decided I could help you part of the way.
Okay.
Well, it's a little bit of a difficult example. I was on my honeymoon on an island in Belize, and a couple were the caretakers of the island, and they were the only ones that lived there. And in the middle of the night, they got into a fight, and the guy was pushing the woman around and yelling at her and all this stuff. it woke me up. And I had to make a decision of if I should intervene there or not, because there's this woman that's on the island, and I could intervene and stop the fight from then, but you know, it could actually make it worse for her afterwards, right? So I was left with this situation of what do am I able to help here or not? And I decided actually not to intervene. I listened to make sure it didn't get like very dangerous, and didn't intervene at that point, and instead talked to the sailboat crew afterwards, and said, hey, can we offer this woman a ride off the island and, you know, an opportunity, like some money to help her get away from this person, because she was very dependent on it. And they said, we've offered many times and she refuses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so in retrospect, I felt like not intervening at that point was probably in the end better for this woman who wasn't going to leave the situation. Then the next day was going to be alone on the island with this guy again. You know, but it just kind of this example of it can get very kind of, I guess, complicated quickly. And so it wasn't a lack of desire to intervene. It was what's the skillful means here to not make it worse, right? Or to, you know, at least help or whatever. And I still I'm not sure if that was the right thing to do or not. I guess I feel okay about it, in that I just didn't turn the other way, and try to figure out a way to do it, but it was definitely a difficult thing, you know, a very difficult thing to sit with.
Yeah. Yeah. And they say actually that police officers do not like to intervene in domestic disputes, not because it would make it worse for the woman later, but because the guy, if it's, you know, the guy, he's so out of control that they could wind up getting hurt. Yeah. They don't like intervening in domestic disputes. And also because sometimes the woman says, go away, let us sort this out ourselves. Yeah. Yeah, we're used to it.
Yeah.
Difficult, yeah.
I think some people have heard this story, but it's something of intervening. It was in San Francisco, and I was riding the BART into the city with the daughter. And we were getting to the city, and it was the end of the line, and we got out, and quite a lot of people, you know, in the BART station. And there was an altercation, and it was a police officer taking a African American male down on the ground with excessive force. So I just went right up and I said over and over again, I'm bearing witness. I'm bearing witness. And I said it quite loud, and I wouldn't move, and I wanted to I'm thankful for the Quakers in a way for giving the strategy. So staying there and doing this was actually quite powerful. And then there was I didn't know what the police was going to do. I looked, and there was another police person, and he was yelling at me and told me I didn't understand, and all I could see was the face of this African American male looking at me and saying, "Thank you," you know. And so I just kept saying, "I bear witness, I bear witness." And there was another woman in this whole crowd. Talk about bystanders, right? And there was another woman that came up and kind of began to join in a little bit with me. And then the police officer took the man. But it was an act. Going for it.
Yeah.
Bearing witness. I mean, it's not what you can do, but you can say, I'm bearing witness to what this egregious act.
Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of the people who are videoing things are doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the guy who fell on the track and the people who went, that one person videoed the whole thing. Yeah. So sometimes, you know, we select our way to help. Yeah. Cheryl?
So I have a story that I didn't, a small story that I didn't help, and then what I did help.
Okay.
So I was dashing on my way to attend the teaching on compassion, of course, you know, like my mainstream teachings. And I had my bike, I was dashing, and I just wanted to get where it's going. And this gentleman asked me, and I could kind of tell that it was hard for him to ask. He kind of looked a little bit well-dressed, like he was going someplace, and he was just like, do you have $2 so I can catch the bus? I mean, not the bus, yeah, the bus to get to a job interview. And I felt so bad about this. I hoped he's a bodhisattva because I just said no. I had $2, but I decided I was going to give it to someone else down in the station who panhandled. So I completely just didn't pay attention to the situation. So I said no, and I kind of dashed off down the stairs with my bike. I immediately felt so bad that I actually dashed up the stairs with my bike, hoping I could find him, and I didn't. So I felt just it was like a reality check of how much this stuff is on our minds, because I felt such a coldness when I said no.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really bad about that. And then there's many other times that I'd be once again on my bike, and I passed by people who were just lying on the sidewalk, and everyone else was passing by. And I would stop and call 911, and they would say things like, well, did you go up and touch him and move him? And I was like, no, I'm standing here to call you because that's what you do. Because in terms of, it was like, well, is he breathing? Appears to be breathing. So I asked those kind of questions. So I just felt like that it was important for me to stop, even though I may have been in a hurry. So I was like, okay, it's important for me to stop, so I can have these times when I do get involved. And
Yeah. Yeah, good. Thank you. We're going to stop the stories now. Okay, and continue the teaching. Okay, 106. Thus the Bodhisattva Supushpa Chandra, although aware of the harm the king would cause him, accepted his own suffering in order to eradicate the miseries of many. So I don't know the story behind this. I looked in one commentary, and the commentary didn't have the story behind it either. But apparently, some bodhisattva, if he did something to help somebody else, would get harmed, but he did it anyway.
There's the story in the back of this book.
Oh, there is? Would you like to read it? Thank you. That wasn't where I consulted, but maybe I should have.
At the time of the decline of the doctrine of the Tathagata, Rinpoche, Padme, Dawa,
It's okay, forget the name.
there lived a monk called Supushpa Chandra. At one time, while dwelling in Samanta Vajra Grove together with 7,000 bodhisattvas, he perceived with his heightened awareness that if he were to go to the jewel palace of King Viradatta and reveal the Dharma, many living creatures would attain higher states of existence and liberation. But if he were not to reveal it, they would not obtain these states. In addition, he knew that if he went, the king would kill him. But nonetheless, he decided to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it tells that's the basic gist of it.
Yeah.
And it tells that he
Okay.
went there and...
Yeah. Okay. So there it is. A bodhisattva knew that if he went to the palace to teach the king or to teach probably the whole court, yeah, then many people would benefit and attain realizations. But he also knew that the king would kill him. But he went anyway because, he knew through his psychic powers that it would bring more benefit for more people in the long run. Okay, 107. Thus, because they love to pacify the pains of others. Wow. They love to pacify the pains of others. Do we love to pacify the pains of others? Thus, because they love to pacify the pains of others, those whose minds are attuned in this way would enter even the deepest hell, just as a wild goose plunges into a lotus pool. So apparently wild geese love lotus pools. And so they say for a bodhisattva, who has dedicated their life's energy towards the benefit of others, they would go even to the deepest hell realm in order to pacify the pains of others. Okay? So, another extreme situation. Yeah. Yeah. We're taught to make those aspirations, you know. May I go to the deepest hell realm to liberate the sentient beings there? We're told to make those aspirations as a way of aspiring for where we want to go. Yeah. But also try and think about, okay, it's not the deepest hell. What would I go a block down the street to help somebody who needs it? Okay.
Oscar Schindler.
Yes. Oscar Schindler, good example. People see Schindler's List. Yeah. So that.
He went to the deepest realms of hell.
Hmm?
He played around with his wife, he, did all kinds of things, but in the end, he went to the deepest realms of hell to save lives.
Yeah.
And when it was over, he said he cried because he felt if he'd given up his ring, he could have saved one more.
Mm.
And that always impressed me. It's always stuck with me.
That he did give up his ring?
No, that he didn't give it up. He looked at it as he was escaping Germany and he cried. He said, I could have saved another
The person, yeah, if I had given it up, yeah.
Well, and he died impoverished, he'd been a very wealthy
Yeah, he
man.
was
Mm.
had nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good example, isn't it? Uh-huh.
It's an example of a person like Milarepa who led, to all appearances, a dissolute life,
Mhm.
or even killing people on the highway, I think was what Milarepa did.
Well, that's what he did before he became a
Yeah,
Buddhist.
exactly.
Not after he became a Buddhist.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is Oscar Schindler had been what Milarepa
Yeah,
was.
had
He
done
was
all
the
those negative
watchword.
things, yeah.
And then he went to the deep end.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, to try in our practice, if we could be like that, fantastic. Even if we can't, start with the small things that we can do. Yeah. Because sometimes with these examples, and the reason so often in the Dharma, you'll see these examples that are like so way out there of what the bodhisattvas do. And in many cultures, seeing those examples, you feel so inspired. Oh, wow, there's people who can go to the lowest hell to benefit others. I want to be able to do that. That's so inspiring. Then there's other people who look at those stories and say, that's too scary. I can never do that. I don't want to even get near it. Okay? So we don't want to be like the second person. Yeah, we can understand how that second person thinks. Yeah, because maybe we are like that second person. But I'm saying if you are, then just instead of saying, I have to be like the great bodhisattvas tomorrow, I'm in kindergarten, bodhisattvas are doing postgraduate work. Yeah, I'll do what kindergartners do. Yeah. And I'll share my Legos with somebody else. Yeah. So, instead of thinking, I immediately have to be like that, just think of a small thing that you can do and feel comfortable with. Oh, I shared my Legos. That was nice. Tomorrow maybe I'll share my chocolate bar. Who said no way? Yeah. So you start like that, okay, I'll share my chocolate bar. Okay, then I'm going on to second grade. Yeah. Maybe I'll share my answers to the homework. No, I won't, because that's not going to benefit the other person. I'm not going to share the answers to the homework. I'm going to share, maybe I'll share the books where that person can find the answers to the homework. Okay? So give ourselves some small things to do. Okay, 108. Will not the ocean of joy that shall exist when all beings are free be sufficient for me? What am I doing wishing for my liberation alone? You know, again, asking ourselves, looking at the self-centeredness, won't the ocean of joy that shall exist when all beings are free of samsara, won't that satisfy me? You know, won't that joy be sufficient for me? Why am I concerned only with my own liberation? Only with my own stuff? Okay. So I find Shantideva so effective, you know, as a teacher, because he's having this dialogue with himself, but he's having this dialogue with me. Yeah, and I have to ask myself that question. And then sit there with that question. Yeah, why am I so intent on my own liberation? Why, you know, why do I shy away from the bodhisattva path? The joy of all sentient beings isn't enough for me. My own happiness will give me more pleasure than the joy of all beings being liberated. Kind of like, huh? Who is thinking like that? I am, but I don't want to.
When I read Ajahn book, where he said, you know, he gave up the bodhisattva path because he felt that he could benefit more people by being an arhat in his life. So I'm still trying to understand how does something like that happen?
I don't understand it either. Unless, the only way it could happen. No, even that. I mean, I was about to say maybe he's really a bodhisattva and he shows that example for benefiting sentient beings. But then I say, how could that example benefit sentient beings? Yeah. So I don't understand that. I don't understand.
He consciously gave it up.
Yeah. And usually it's said if you give up bodhicitta, you...
I just wanted to echo what you're saying about how effective the way of this writing really is, in to the point where, you know, where we left off earlier today, I basically spent, you know, hours walking around contemplating this nihilistic point of view and kind of a question to ask you, because we talk about, I've noticed every day you brought responsibility, and it was almost like a little bit of like, I think I got her on the, you know, because we left off in that one passage there about, you know, there is no I, so how can I have a responsibility? And like the first thing you said as we sat down, and I think it was just a real eye-opener to me as far as like a little bit of knowledge is a scary, scary thing. and to make sure you read the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah. That just because we're saying there's no ultimately existent I doesn't give us a way out. Yeah. There's conventional existence. And pain exists conventionally. Okay, so then 109. So here we're working ourselves up to really dedicate ourselves, you know, for others. And then what's going to come up? Self-centeredness says, aren't I wonderful? I'm helping so many beings. Aren't I a wonderful person? I hope all these other people notice how kind I am, how compassionate I am, how many times I stepped in to do the dishes when I wasn't on the rota. You know, I think they should really give me a prize, you know, for being the person who does the most dishes when they're not on the rota, you know. Or at least they should acknowledge it, even if they don't give me a prize. They should acknowledge how kind I am.
You should have a monastic of the month.
Yeah, a monastic of the month. Yeah. That way. Oh, good. Okay, I have to do some dishes, but now I get some glory. And it'll go out in the e-news. Venerable Yeshi is the monastic of the month. She built more shelves than anybody else. The what? The monastic of the month. Yeah, M-O-M. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So 109, therefore, although working for the benefit of others, I should not be conceited or consider myself wonderful. And because of the joy there is in solely doing this, I should have no hope for any ripening effect. Okay, so I'm not going to get puffed up because I did some small thing for some sentient being who has been incredibly kind to me from beginningless time. Yeah. I'm not going to get conceited over that. And because of the joy I feel, just feeling delighted at giving, yeah, then I'm not going to hope for any other joy or any other happiness, because the happiness comes from just doing the action, not from, being monastic of the month, not from, here it says ripening effect, having a good rebirth, getting some karmic perk out of it. But I'm doing it simply because it's the right thing to do, and I feel joyful and fulfilled when I live according to my own values and principles. I don't need a thank you. I don't need recognition. But then at the corner of our mind it says, but for their sake, they should really learn how to say thank you. Yeah, it's not for me. I'm not looking for a thank you. But from their sake, they should really. Maybe I should remind them. Yeah. Okay, 110. Therefore, just as I protect myself from unpleasant things, however small, in the same way I should act towards others with a compassionate and caring mind. Okay, so just as right now we protect ourselves from the tiniest thing, yeah, then we should protect others with a compassionate and caring mind. Hmm? So, you can see how we protect ourselves from the smallest thing. When we, are doing the serpentine walking out on the deck, and there's a stone there, if you're barefoot, it hurts to step on the stone. We avoid stepping on stones, even if we have to go out of the line a little bit to do so. Don't we? Yeah? So, why don't, let's do that also for others. It's something small, and care for others, with a compassionate, caring mind that we have for ourselves when we avoid even stepping on a small stone. Hmm? Okay. And then, so that's 110. 111. Although the basis is quite impersonal, through constant familiarity I have come to regard the drops of sperm and blood, or sperm and egg, of others as I. So again, he's coming back to this thing You know, the basis, my body's the basis of my life, you know, is quite impersonal. It's not a person. It's not mine. Why isn't it mine? It's from the sperm and egg of my parents. And simply, it's theirs, plus all the broccoli and everything else you've eaten that came from the farmers. So this body in no way is ours. And yet, through familiarity, we've developed this concept that it is I, or it is mine. Simply through familiarity. You know, when you really think about it, yeah, why do I consider this body I? Or why do I consider it mine? It really does. You know, there's nothing about this thing that belongs to me. All the genetic material is from others. And everything that the body grew into, because of the genetic material, also came from other living beings in the form of the food that I ate. There's nothing that I contributed to making this body. So why am I so attached to it and think that it's I or mine? Especially when this attachment to my body makes me miserable. So in the same way, why should I be unable to regard the bodies of others as I? Yeah? This body, there's nothing about it that's me. Yet through familiarity, I think of it as I or mine. So what's to stop me from looking at others' bodies, which also came from somebody else's sperm and eggs, and all the food they ate? Why shouldn't I, through familiarity, why can't I develop the thought that all those other bodies are I or mine? Why can't I do this? Yeah, if it's just through familiarity. And if I do so, wow, that would really give me an incredible ability to be a benefit to others, because I would take their pain seriously as if it were mine, and I would step in and help. Hence, it is not difficult to see that my body is also that of others. There's nothing about this body that's me and mine. Okay? So my body actually is others. It's mom and dad and the farmers. So why shouldn't I use it to benefit mom and dad and the farmers and all the other sentient beings while I'm at it? Because there's nothing about this body that's me or mine. And especially, when we do the inner mandala offering, we offer our body to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and we do this mandala offering again and again and again, thinking that our body becomes what I was describing yesterday, all the different things in the mandala and all the different offerings filling the sky. And we offer that to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So we've given our body away. It no longer belongs to us. It belongs to the three jewels. What do the three jewels want us to do with the body that now belongs to them? They want us to use it to benefit sentient beings and to transform our mind. So you see how powerful thought is when we think, this is my body, I'm going to choose how to do it, and I feel like sleeping 12 hours tonight, even though I can get by on 10. Yeah. When we think it gives us this feeling of, I can do anything I want. But if we think I offered this body to the Buddhas, no, it's not mine anymore. So what would the Buddha want me to do with it? Now, yes, of course, if this body were totally wiped out and exhausted, the Buddha would say sleep and rest so that you can get up tomorrow and do something useful. The Buddha wouldn't say stay up all night and make yourself even more exhausted so that you faint tomorrow. You know, the Buddha would say rest. But this thing that we have about how we self-indulge, the Buddha certainly wouldn't advocate that. Okay, so I gave this body away. It doesn't belong to me. I have to use it for what the Buddhas want it used for. And, you know, if we think like that, that helps us instead of being so possessive. Mine. Questions, comments? Anything? Yeah.
I'm wondering why the mind gets so easily pulled into the extremes. Like when you've been talking, the thing that comes up in my mind is if I offered my time and my care to everyone, then I wouldn't be able to get anything done. But I see that that's an extreme because there needs to be some balance. It's interesting why the mind doesn't go to some balance. It goes always to
Those extremes. And when you say, like in your case, I wouldn't get anything done, the things that you have to do, aren't they also involved in helping others?
Yes.
I mean, you're kind of the chief prison project person now. So if you ran around, you know, doing all these other things, the prisoners, the inmates would suffer because they need the Dharma. Okay, so it's not necessarily selfish on your part to say, yeah, you know, I could wash all the dishes every single day. Yeah, but it is important to help these people. And it's not selfish to say, I need to use my time to help these people. Yeah. If you were saying, I need to use my time so that I could, you know, watch some movies on the internet, yeah, not so good. But you're doing something that's already beneficial. Okay? So then you have to see, you know, are you being asked to do a huge thing or asked to do a small thing? If somebody's asking you for a favor that takes 15 minutes, do it. The letters will wait. If somebody's asking you to do something that's going to take a week and, you know, all these guys need the Dharma, then maybe you have to say, I'm sorry, you know, I can help you for so long, but I have a responsibility to help these other people too. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as our body and the familiarity point, was there's one thing that has come up in my art classes, and it might be helpful if you think you're really familiar with your body. Let's just assume everybody knows how to draw very well. Right now, could you draw your face? Your own face? You can't. I can't as an artist. I've been to college for it. I can't do it. Without a mirror. So I really don't know myself.
Interesting. Yeah.
Just a comment about your response to Venerable Jigme shows me that the motivation for why I do things also gets so skewed. Because as long as I think that it's my list of things that needs to be done, then it is, you know, then that's my self-centered thought at work. If I'm
Yes.
not paying attention to what really is the benefit of what I'm doing, then I don't have a proper way to gauge where I should give and where I should not.
Right.
So that is very helpful to
Yeah.
bring to the surface.
Yeah. And so let me put this in here too. If we're just fixated on, I got to check these things off my list. Then we feel torn when somebody asks us for help, like, wait, I want to check these things off my list, and you're bugging me, asking me to do stuff. But if you realize that, if you think like that, then you haven't, our motivation for doing what's on our list is not suitable. Because we have to really look, what's on my list? Why am I doing these things to start with? Yeah, it's not selfish. I'm doing it because the things I'm doing to start with are of benefit to other living beings, and because they're a benefit to the Dharma. Yeah, so if I'm doing that, and like I said, you have to gauge, is it somebody's asking you for 15 minutes, or somebody's asking you for a week? Yeah, or is somebody asking you for something that's an emergency? Yeah, maybe it takes a whole day, but it's an emergency. Then maybe you do have to put down what you've been doing that does benefit others, because at this particular moment, that is more important for others. So we always have to look at things in that way. And, when we have this idea like, I have so much work to do and I have such a long list and these people aren't helping me get through my list, it's driving me crazy, then to step back and think, why am I doing this list? If I feel like that, then I don't have the right motivation for doing the things that are on the list. Because I'm only seeing them as things I've got to do and I've got to get done so I can check them off the list so I can go on to do something else. That's not the kind of motivation we want to have for doing what we do, is it? Okay, so when we come back to this thing of, my list, check up, why are we doing it? Okay. Enough to contemplate here?